Hi, I'm Delara, and for most of my life, my family treated me like a ghost at their own dinner table. No matter what I achieved, it was never enough to earn a seat that mattered. At my sister's engagement party, I was seated next to the restroom again. But then, her fiancé pulled out his phone, Googled my name, and everything unraveled. What happens when the family that silenced you is forced to hear your truth, publicly? And what if they still pretend they never knew? The backyard looked like it had been lifted straight out of a magazine. Every tablecloth was perfectly pressed. Candles flickered in little glass jars, and the flowers, white roses and baby's breath, were arranged like they had an audience to impress. I stepped onto the patio, heels hitting the concrete softly, eyes sweeping over the scene. This was Vera's big night, after all, her engagement party with Alaric. Of course it was perfect. She'd never accept anything less. A server smiled and gestured toward the seating chart. I found my name written neatly in gold ink. Table 9. I followed the winding path around the central tables, past the ones with place cards for Mom and Dad, the Clarks, Vera's bridesmaids, and there, tucked right by the bathroom, near a serving station, was mine. Table 9. 2 folding chairs, one centerpiece wilted under the sun, and a direct view of the caterer's staging area. I took a breath and smiled like it didn't matter, because it wasn't new. Lenora, my mother, had looked up briefly when I arrived, waving distractedly before refocusing her attention on Vera. She was holding court with her friends, their laughter high-pitched and precise, like everything else she curated. I sat down and adjusted my dress, pretending the smell of antiseptic wafting from the restroom wasn't bothering me. Someone passed behind me, said, "Oh, this must be overflow seating." I pretended not to hear it. Across the yard, Vera was glowing in that way she always did when everyone was watching her. The center of attention, the perfect daughter, her hair curled just enough to look effortless, her dress pressed just enough to look casual. Every movement she made seemed choreographed for admiration, and she was good at it. I had to give her that. A woman in a lavender blouse sat next to me, smiling politely. "You must be Vera's sister." "I am," I said, offering a smile. "Oh, so what do you do?" Her tone was friendly, curious. Before I could speak, Vera's voice cut in. "She handles emails and stuff," she called out across the patio, a glint in her eye. "Admin things. She's always been great at organizing folders." Laughter rippled through the nearby tables. Light, dismissive. I clenched my teeth behind a smile, nodding. The woman looked at me with a little too much sympathy. "That's important work too," she offered. I wanted to say, "I run a firm with assets that could buy this entire neighborhood," but I didn't, because the truth wasn't welcome here. Only Vera's version of it. When the wine was poured, I sipped slowly. I'd learned a long time ago that pushing back in moments like this didn't earn respect. It earned exile. So I stayed quiet. I always had. That was the role carved out for me early. The quieter one. The reasonable one. The one who didn't make things uncomfortable. I watched Alaric from afar, standing near the fireplace with Vera's father and some of his colleagues. He wasn't laughing. He was scanning the crowd slowly, eyes lingering just a beat longer on me. He didn't say anything, but I saw it. That slight squint. That tiny crease between his brows. He noticed. At least someone did. "Such a sweet gesture to come all the way here," an aunt whispered, leaning over as she passed me on her way back from the buffet. "Especially when it's not really your circle." I nodded and kept smiling. Later, when I offered to help clear some dishes, Vera waved me off like I was embarrassing her. "No need," she said, glancing toward the guests. "You're not staff." So I sat back down at table 9, alone. Again. And that's when it happened. Something shifted. Not in the air, not in the people, but inside me. I felt it like a thread pulling taut across my chest. The way Alaric looked at me, the way Vera snapped back into performance mode as soon as eyes were on her, the way no one, not one person, questioned why I was seated near a toilet, while Vera's college roommate got a seat beside the bride's mother. It wasn't new, but it wasn't invisible anymore. I picked up my glass and stared across the table, letting the hum of the party dull around me. Something in me wasn't willing to swallow it this time. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen next, but I knew it was coming. The microphone let out a soft buzz as Vera stepped up to the podium, and the crowd leaned in with wine glasses raised and anticipation painted across their faces. I stayed seated at table 9, my fingertips brushing the linen as I watched her. Lenora dabbed the corner of her eye with a handkerchief she'd probably spritzed with her favorite rosewater. Alaric smiled, standing off to the side, hands folded politely, pride stitched into every line of his jaw. I didn't expect to be acknowledged, not really. But a small part of me, naive, stubborn, still listened closely. Tonight wouldn't have been possible without the incredible support of our parents, Vera began, her voice ringing like she'd rehearsed every vowel. Lenora and Calvin, your generosity made this entire evening come to life. The applause came fast. Cameras flashed. Someone whistled. I blinked. It was subtle, clean, a well-practiced omission. Not a word about the invoice I paid. The floral arrangement budget I approved. The rental deposit that hit my bank account before hers. Nothing about the quiet call 2 months ago when she whispered, I just need a little help, but let's keep it between us. Mom's already doing so much. I watched her deliver her thanks like a woman who truly believed she'd done it all alone. Or worse, believed no one would dare challenge her version of the truth. Alaric looked at me briefly, his smile faltering. There was a pause in his brow, barely perceptible, but I saw it. I tuned out the rest of the speech. The night air turned heavier, like it absorbed the weight of my silence. Around me, the guests laughed at Vera's jokes and clinked glasses when she toasted her future. I sat still, feet crossed at the ankles, hands folded neatly in my lap, remembering. I remembered the time she hosted a baby shower and asked me to create the invitations, design the logo, and then told everyone it was done by her assistant. I remembered when I helped her land her first consulting client by reworking her pitch deck, and she introduced me at brunch as my little sister who loves spreadsheets. But this? This was different. This was a stage, a microphone, an audience, and a choice. She could have said one sentence, even a vague, and to those who helped in quiet ways, thank you. But she didn't. Not because she forgot, because it wasn't convenient. Applause brought me back. I clapped. Lightly, mechanical. Vera bowed her head as if she were receiving an award, then stepped down, weaving back toward her circle of admirers. Alaric walked toward her slowly, the crease in his brow still there. Lenora leaned over to whisper something to a woman in navy lace, her eyes darting. Nervous. The night shifted again, from warmth to something stiffer. I stood, smoothing my dress. People were milling about, moving between tables. Someone said, "She always delivers the best speeches." Another murmured, "I didn't know she organized everything herself." A guest near the bar caught my eye and said with a grin, "Nice of you to come. It must be hard with your schedule, right?" I gave a polite nod, stored the comment away. Then I caught Alaric watching me again, not staring, just registering. As I cleared my plate, he stepped beside me and spoke low enough that only I could hear. "You do work in investments, right?" The question felt casual, but the timing wasn't. "I do," I said simply. He nodded once. "Finance?" "Yes. Venture capital." He paused. That tiny crease again. He said, pulling his phone out slowly. "What's the name of your firm?" I told him. His thumbs moved quickly. The glow of the screen lit up his face. He didn't say a word, just stared at his screen like he'd just uncovered a lie. Alaric didn't speak. He just held out his phone, his eyes flicking from the screen to me, then back again. I knew what he was looking at before I saw it. The headline sat right above my photo. "Under 40 female founders to watch." I didn't flinch. Yeah, I said quietly. That's me. His brows furrowed. Why didn't anyone mention this? Before I could answer, I saw Vera walking toward us, her pace too measured, her smile stretched too wide. She caught a glimpse of the screen and halted mid-step. Her face didn't fall. It shifted. Not panic, just recalibration. A performer missing a cue and improvising. She laughed, a little too loudly. Oh, that's old. Just a silly list. She waved it off like a napkin caught in the wind. But Alaric wasn't smiling. Before the silence could spread, Lenora clapped her hands. Everyone, let's refresh our glasses. Dessert is almost ready. People moved like they'd been prompted, grateful for a cue to break eye contact. I remained still. Then something inside me cracked. Not violently, not with noise, but with clarity. I was 8 when I won the blue ribbon. It was for a painting of a girl riding her bike through a storm. I'd worked on it for days, hiding in the basement with my crayons and a half-empty set of watercolor tubes. My art teacher told me it was emotionally advanced. I didn't know what that meant then. I just knew it made me feel proud. I brought it home, bursting. Mom was in the kitchen talking about Vera's cheer uniform that had just arrived. Dad was at the dining table with a newspaper. I won! I'd shouted, holding up the painting. Mom glanced. That's lovely, sweetheart. Did you hang your uniform yet, Vera? You have practice on Thursday, remember? I left the painting on the counter. I found it 3 weeks later, folded in half, wedged between old grocery ads and the toaster. The ribbon was crumpled. That was the first time I realized forgetting can be a choice. Back at the party, Vera was surrounded by people again, laughing, gesturing, posing for selfies. But it wasn't the same. Something had shifted. Not just in the room, but in me. They didn't forget me accidentally. They didn't overlook me out of distraction. They erased me because it made their roles easier to maintain. Their version of family, of success, of Vera. My smile wasn't hollow now. It was precise. As I turned back to the table, I passed 2 guests whispering over a phone. She's always been sort of outside, right? Quiet, background type? They didn't know I heard. I didn't correct them. I just walked past and smiled. Not bitter, measured. I wasn't angry at the narrative. I was just done letting it stand. From across the yard, Vera looked at me again. Her glass was raised but untouched. Her jaw was tight. She held her expression in place, like it was part of her outfit. Lenora leaned in toward a cousin, talking fast, darting her eyes toward me like I might erupt. Alaric hadn't moved. He was still holding the phone, his thumb frozen mid-scroll. The music played on. People danced. But I stood in the middle of it all, like someone who'd just remembered they had a voice. They spent their lives looking through me. Tonight, they were going to see me. The music had softened into a low murmur, blending with the hum of distant conversation and the occasional clink of glass. I was at the drink station, my fingers curled around a fresh tumbler of sparkling water, when Aunt Carol appeared beside me, her perfume strong enough to chase the bubbles right out of the glass. She leaned in, eyes smiling, but voice sharpened by something else entirely. Let's not ruin your sister's big night, dear. It's not the place. It sounded gentle, almost kind. But it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command in a velvet glove. I nodded slowly, turning my attention back to the glass, as if that would cool the sting. Behind me, the party went on. Clusters of guests laughing too loudly, pockets of people exchanging polite nothings. From across the garden, I felt Vera's gaze pierce through the soft lights like a laser. She wasn't smiling this time, not the way she had earlier. I caught Lenora pulling her aside near the hydrangeas, lips tight, whispering in that way mothers do when they think they're the only ones holding the structure together. Her eyes flicked toward me just once, quick, clipped, like I was a crack in the floor she was hoping no one would step on. Alaric stood not far, arms crossed, gaze shifting between the 3 of us. I couldn't read his face yet, but I felt a calculation brewing behind his silence. The bitterness in Aunt Carol's voice echoed something else, a memory I hadn't touched in years. Back at Vera's high school graduation party, when I wore a simple blue dress. Nothing extravagant, nothing loud. Still, Mom had pulled me aside. "Sweetheart," she'd said in her most sugary tone, "you don't want to pull focus today. Maybe keep your jacket on? Just so you don't distract from Vera." I had smiled and nodded. Because what else do you do when the people meant to protect you are also the ones telling you to disappear? Tonight, I could taste that same syrupy tone in every word being whispered around me. Vera approached not long after, drink in hand, her smile barely holding form. "Hey," she said. "Just checking? Everything okay?" These parties can feel like a lot sometimes, especially for people who aren't used to them. I looked at her and said nothing. She shifted her weight, laughed softer this time. You know how Mom gets when things feel unbalanced. There it was again. That practiced condescension hidden under concern. A sentence carefully arranged like roses to hide the thorns. I took a sip of my drink, let the silence stretch. "I've been balanced my entire life, Vera," I said calmly. Quietly, conveniently. Maybe it's time things got a little loud. She blinked, just once. Her smile froze in place, as if waiting for a new cue that wasn't coming. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words died somewhere in her throat. Alaric was watching now, and he wasn't smiling either. I didn't wait for her comeback. I turned and walked away, steady steps through the crowd that suddenly didn't seem so interested in her anymore. I didn't shout, I didn't make a scene, but every move I made tonight had become louder than any argument, and something told me, deep in my chest, this tension wasn't over. It was only starting to simmer. The email was never meant to be printed, but that night, it was. I'd gone inside for something as simple as a clutch I'd left near the kitchen. Something ordinary, something that shouldn't have changed anything. But the moment I stepped into that back hallway, past the chatter and the soft music and the smell of warming pastries, I noticed the hum of the portable printer still running. There was a single sheet of paper lying in the tray. I almost didn't look. I almost walked away. But curiosity is a habit built from years of exclusion. I picked it up, half expecting to see a vendor's invoice or a last-minute table update. Instead, the second line caught my eye. "Please keep my sister away from the mic," it read. "She has a tendency to make things about herself. And honestly, her wardrobe choices are always distracting." The email was from Vera, sent to her event planner, forwarded to the catering team, and now, accidentally printed, like a confession dropped in the wrong pew. I read it again, and again. My name, her words. I folded it once, neatly, and slipped it into my bag. When I found her near the garden path, Vera was adjusting her neckline and preparing to rejoin the crowd. She didn't see me until I was nearly beside her. I held out the sheet with a calm hand. "This accidentally printed." She froze. Her eyes dropped to the paper. She read it in a blink, and then again, slower. Her fingers curled slightly, tightening around her champagne flute. That draft wasn't meant to be seen," she said quickly. "It's not what I meant." I cut her off with my voice, flat and direct. "No, I think it's exactly what you meant." She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "You're overreacting." It was a phrase I'd heard before. It was practically Vera's favorite reflex. Footsteps approached. Lenora's voice followed. "Is something going on?" She looked at both of us, her eyes landing on the paper now in Vera's hand. She plucked it gently, read the lines, and her lips tightened. "This is clearly a misunderstanding," she said after a pause. "Everyone's under pressure. You know how these things get." "No," I said, holding my ground. "This isn't stress. This is a pattern, and it's not going to keep happening." Vera tried to interject, her tone already building to protest. I raised my hand slightly. She stopped. For once. "I won't be the punchline in a room I helped pay for," I said clearly. Vera scoffed, her voice clipped. "You're always so dramatic." No, I replied. I'm just exact. And you're not used to anyone seeing you clearly. The hallway had gone quiet. Lenora's expression flickered between control and fear. I folded the paper again and handed it to Vera. Her hands trembled slightly as she took it. Without another word, I turned and stepped back into the party. A few heads turned. A cousin tilted her head, reading something unspoken on my face. Alaric looked up from his drink, brows knitting together. I didn't say anything to anyone. I didn't have to. The story was starting to tell itself. If Vera wanted a war of perception, she just lost the first battle. By the time I stepped back into the garden, everything looked just as it had before. Tables lit with string lights, glasses filled, laughter circulating like perfume on the breeze. But something was different. I felt it in the way people glanced my way and quickly looked down. In the way Vera's voice climbed just a little too high, like she was trying to reclaim a stage that had quietly shifted. I didn't need a spotlight. I never did. Alaric approached me near the edge of the garden. He didn't offer a greeting or a drink. He just held out his phone. On the screen, a familiar headshot stared back at me. My professional portrait. Just above it, the headline read, "Meet the women changing venture capital before 40. Your company, this is yours?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded. He didn't say anything else, but the crease in his forehead deepened. He gave me the kind of nod that meant more than words. An acknowledgement, a reckoning. Nearby, a couple of guests clustered near the fire pit were huddled over their own screens. One nudged the other, whispering, "She's on Forbes. Did you know that?" "No," the other replied. "Why didn't they say anything?" The ripples had started. Vera noticed. I watched her laugh too loudly at a joke someone hadn't quite finished. Her smile wobbled at the edges. She touched her hair 3 times in the same minute, a tic she always had when she felt control slipping. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Someone asked, "Isn't that Vera's little sister?" A cousin leaned toward her. "Why didn't you ever mention your sister was in Forbes?" Vera's mouth twitched. "She doesn't like attention." I stepped forward, voice calm and steady. "I like truth." Our eyes locked. She looked away first. Alaric stood nearby, arms crossed. "You knew, didn't you?" he asked her, tone even. Vera shifted. "It wasn't relevant." "It wasn't convenient," Alaric corrected. There was no anger in his voice, just precision. It was the kind of response that didn't need volume to sting. Guests nearby had fallen silent. They didn't need the full context. They knew enough. I scanned the faces around me, some confused, some intrigued, a few simply uncomfortable. Lenora stayed in the corner, lips pursed so tightly they looked white. But I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel vindication. What I felt was something quieter and heavier. I didn't need to speak again. The facts were speaking for me. The whispers were louder than any mic could have been. People would Google. They would ask questions. They would find answers. And they'd learn the truth that had always been there. Vera had crafted a narrative with herself in the center. I was just supposed to orbit quietly, throwing money when needed, shrinking when asked. But now the center was shifting. I walked away, calm, deliberate. This wasn't revenge. This was recognition. They ignored the woman behind the curtain. Now the curtain was gone. The air outside had shifted. What was once a celebration now crackled with something else. Uncertainty, maybe, or the collective instinct that a storm had already passed, but another was waiting to break. I moved through the crowd slowly, unhurried. Eyes followed me. Phones buzzed in hands. I could see the ripple of awareness pass from person to person like wind through wheat. My name, once whispered in dismissal, was now murmured with questions, curiosity. A few looked guilty. Most looked intrigued. Near the bar, a bridesmaid in a backless satin dress raised her voice just enough to be heard. "Some people just can't stand not being the center of attention, huh?" There was laughter, short and sharp. I stopped. turned. Some people confuse being seen with being self-centered, I replied, voice even. She didn't answer, but the group quieted. That was when Vera pushed through the guests like she'd been waiting backstage for her cue. "You hijacked my night!" she snapped, face flushed. "Everything was fine until you made it about you." "No," I said simply. "Everything was fine until your version of the truth couldn't hold the weight of a Google search." She opened her mouth, rage rising fast, but Alaric stepped between us. "I think you should stop," he said to her. Calm, cold. And then, from the other side of the garden, a voice spoke. Older, confident, surprised. "Wait a minute," the woman said, pointing gently with a cocktail napkin. "Aren't you the donor who funded our women's fund last spring? You asked to remain anonymous." All heads turned, including Vera's. I nodded once. Yes. A silence fell, thick and abrupt. Vera's face drained of color. The applause that had once chased her every word was nowhere now. Instead, there was a quiet unraveling. People seeing past the surface, remembering what they'd heard, what they'd believed, what they'd been told to ignore. "You wanted control," I said directly to her. "You wanted to curate a version of me that made you more comfortable, easier to stand next to. You didn't want to share the stage, so you edited me out." She said nothing. I turned to the crowd, meeting their eyes without fear. "I didn't come here to be celebrated, but I'm done being erased." Someone nodded. Another murmured something to a friend. One guest, Vera's old college roommate, looked downright ashamed. Vera stood rooted in place. Even Lenora didn't step in this time. She stood by a table, clutching the back of a chair like she couldn't decide whether to sit down or collapse. The music had stopped. No one had noticed when. I looked out over the room, a strange calm taking root inside me. "This isn't my revenge," I said, almost to myself. "It's just my reality, finally allowed in." No one dared speak. They wanted silence. What they got was proof. I stepped forward slowly, the hem of my dress brushing over the grass that had been trampled by hours of champagne-fueled congratulations. This time, no one clapped, no one toasted, no one dared stop me. Eyes followed me, shoulders shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. I reached the head table, paused, and opened my clutch. Inside, 2 envelopes. One cream-colored, sealed with a wax stamp. The other, my original design. The one Vera replaced without explanation. I held the first envelope up, not like a weapon, but like a final receipt. "This," I said quietly but clearly, "is the contract that paid for tonight." I set it down in front of Vera and Lenora. The wax popped softly as I opened it. I let the papers unfold gently, as if giving them time to consider every word they had ignored. My name sat there, typed plainly. My signature at the bottom. The dollar amount circled. The date, 3 weeks before Vera even confirmed her venue. A wave of discomfort swept the table. No one said a word. Then I pulled out the second envelope. "This," I continued, "was the original invitation." I laid it next to the contract. The design was unmistakably mine, simple, elegant, bold. Underneath Vera and Alaric's names, there it was, hosted by Delara Thompson. "I was meant to be part of this," I said, voice steady. "You made me invisible. Again." I didn't need to raise my tone. The silence had already done the amplification for me. The contrast between the lies and the proof sat on linen and crystal like a courtroom exhibit. This wasn't anger. This was evidence. Someone near the back whispered, "She paid for it all?" Another guest tilted their phone to show a neighbor my Forbes feature. Screens glowed. Truth traveled. Alaric was seated at the table now, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He looked up at me, not with shock. He'd already seen the truth, but with something else. Maybe regret, maybe apology. He nodded once. Vera's voice cracked. "You could have told them, Delara." I turned to her. "I did. With every quiet act you pretended not to see, you just never listened." Lenora's lips moved, but no sound came. She blinked slowly, gaze shifting from the envelope to her wine glass. This time, she didn't defend her daughter. She didn't defend herself. And I didn't need her to. I stepped back, not in retreat, but in finality. Each stride toward the garden edge felt like shedding a skin I didn't realize I'd been wearing my whole life. One stitched by omission, hemmed in silence, lined with tolerance. I didn't need to stay. I didn't need them to apologize. For once, I hadn't shown up just to be seen. I stood still. I spoke. I laid it all bare. And now, they would have to sit in what they'd buried me under. Freedom never felt so quiet and so deserved. The package arrived on a Thursday. No warning, no text, just a cardboard box on my doorstep with my father's handwriting on the label. For a moment, I stared at it, unsure if I should open it right away or let it sit beside the door like a question I wasn't ready to answer. Inside, nestled between tissue paper and a copy of my first book, was a note written in careful, all-caps letters. My father never did cursive. I read this twice. The first time to see what you'd written, the second time to hear you. I sat on my couch, the book in my lap, the words blurring under the weight of everything unsaid for years. I flipped through the pages. He had underlined passages, dog-eared corners. He had, in his own way, paid attention. Later that night, I called him. He picked up on the second ring. "Hi, Dad." "Hey, sweetheart." There was a pause, one of those long ones that sit between people who don't quite know where to begin, but know they have to start somewhere. "I should have known," he said softly. "I should have asked more, listened better." "You didn't know because you were always looking in the direction they pointed you," I replied. "I wasn't hiding. I just got tired of yelling into silence." He let out a breath. "Do you want to try again? I mean, start from here?" "I think I do," I said. And I meant it. In the following days, he emailed, asking if I'd be willing to sign a few more books. His co-workers had asked about me, apparently. It wasn't grand. It wasn't showy. But it was sincere. And that made it enough. From Vera, there was nothing. No apology. No message. Just a tagged photo that popped up online a week later. Her smiling in a boutique somewhere, holding a glass of wine like nothing had happened. She was still curating. She's always been the narrator, I thought, watching the screen. But I'm no longer her backdrop. I didn't feel spite. I didn't even feel angry. Just tired. And, oddly, free. My writing had changed too. When I sat back down at my desk, the words came more fluidly, not as defense mechanisms or declarations, but as quiet truths. My editor called with news. The next book's pre-orders were stronger than expected. There was a quiet satisfaction in that. Not vindication, just stability. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I was simply writing because I had something to say. A few days later, I packaged a galley copy of the new book. I didn't add a note, just signed the title page and sealed it in a padded envelope. The address was familiar. Lenora's house. I didn't expect a response. That wasn't the point. This wasn't a bridge offering or an olive branch. This was a door left unlocked, not held open. A chance for her to see me, not through Vera's narrative, not through selective memories, but on the page, where I'd always been honest. Whether she read it or not, that was hers to carry. As I placed the envelope into the outgoing mail bin and stepped outside, Seattle's air greeted me with that late autumn chill that always smells faintly of pine and possibility. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wonder who was talking about me or what still lingered in that house I left behind. This time, I didn't need anyone to see me. I had already seen myself. Looking back, if there's one truth that held me steady, it's this. Silence may keep the peace, but it rarely brings healing. For too long, I chose silence to protect others' comfort. I let myself be edited out of moments I helped build, conversations I should have led, and a family I was always part of, even when they refused to see it. But standing still and speaking up doesn't always mean yelling. Sometimes it's laying down the facts. It's honoring your own story, even when others have tried to rewrite it. It's choosing to live visible, not for recognition, but for integrity. If you've ever felt overlooked, muted, or forced into the shadows by those closest to you, know this: you are not alone. And you are not powerless. Truth has a quiet way of revealing itself, and when it does, it doesn't need volume. It needs courage. So, let me ask you, have you ever felt invisible in your own family? What did you do when your truth was dismissed? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Whether you're from Texas, Michigan, or anywhere else in the world, your voice matters here. If this video touched your heart, leave a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. If you didn't connect with it, let me know why. Let's have that conversation. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because every story has a moment where everything changes, and yours might be next.